first.
Well, we do have a common-sense Conservative plan to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. While this Prime Minister is not worth the cost after 8 years. On inflation, with all his multi-billion-dollar announcements, he is like the pyromaniac pretending to be a fireman, except the hose is spraying gas on the inflationary fire rather than water. According to the Scotiabank's chief economist, these inflationary deficits are driving up mortgage payments. Doesn't he realize that all of his spending is putting the heat and the costs on our homeowners?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has a plan for an affordable and prosperous future. We have a plan that is focused on ensuring that we are building more homes faster, making life more affordable, and growing an economy that works for all Canadians. The Conservative leader has no plan for affordability other than a bunch of taglines. He has no plan for addressing the environment. He has no plan for the economy. We believe in ensuring that Canadians have a fair chance to succeed, and we are acting on that.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, our plan is to axe the tax and cap the spending to bring down inflation and interest rates. We will have a carbon tax election, and people will choose whether they want to quadruple the tax to 61 cents with the NDP and the Prime Minister, or axe the tax under my common sense leadership. But in the meantime, people can't afford to eat. So will the Prime Minister show a little bit of compassion and accept my common sense demand to axe the tax on farmers and food?
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, it is laughable when I hear the Conservative leader talk about affordability. He mentioned in a previous question some concerns he has around housing policy. His plan to build more homes is to cut investments in home building, is to raise taxes on those who are building homes, and when it comes to actually changing the way cities build homes, his deputy leader held a press conference to explicitly declare that Conservatives were siding with the NIMBYs when it comes to zoning reform. We are going to do what's necessary to put money on the table to build more affordable housing, create market conditions to get more homes built, and change the way that cities build homes so we can solve the housing crisis.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
He caused the housing crisis, Mr. Speaker. Under his role as housing minister, the amount of a paycheck necessary to make payments on an average mortgage is gone up to a record smashing 64% from 38%. And he is the only one, along with his Prime Minister, that wants to raise taxes on home building. A massive carbon tax on the building materials that go into assembling those homes. So, will the Prime Minister, instead of hiking the tax, accept my common sense demand to axe the tax on farmers, food, and houses at the same time?
The Honourable Minister of Infrastructure and Housing.
Mr. Speaker, it's interesting because he's actually put his plan on the record, and his plan includes putting the GST back on apartment construction for hundreds of thousands of middle-class homes in this country. He has one of the worst records in the past decade of anyone when it comes to getting homes built when he had the position responsible for housing in Parliament. Mr. Speaker, while he was minister, they built exactly 0 new apartments, 0 cooperative units, and only 6 affordable housing units across the entire country. We are helping get hundreds of thousands of homes built in this country, and we will do what it takes to solve the crisis once and for all.
Last week, this woke Prime Minister hiked his carbon tax scam 23%, despite a majority of Canadians making him spike the hike. As we see record-smashing food bank usage across the country, farmers will pay another $1 billion into this scam, making the cost of groceries even more expensive. After 8 years, this Liberal NDP government is not worth the cost or corruption. Will he finally axe the tax for farmers and food and pass Bill C-234 in its original form in next week's budget, or is his agenda to push even more families into the food banks?
The Honourable Minister of Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to know if members of the Conservative Party who come from Alberta have paid particular attention to what Premier Danielle Smith said about the Canada carbon rebate when she said she manages the finances of her own house, and it turns out that the Canada carbon rebate gives her family more money than she puts in the price on pollution. And guess what? She lives in rural Alberta, so she gets even more, Mr. Speaker. That's the plan. I don't know what the heck they're talking about.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
What we'd like to know is what his next job is, because after the next election, maybe this carbon tax scam will be gone. tax meeting, because they all know after 8 years this Liberal NDP government are like this carbon tax scam and not worth the cost. Why is this Prime Minister hiding? Why doesn't he show some guts, call this meeting so the premiers can tell him to shove his carbon tax where his poll numbers are, in the gutter?
I know we've been away for a couple weeks, and we're looking forward to seeing each other, but try to keep our comments as reasonable as possible. The Honourable Minister of Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, it's nice to see how focused that particular MP is on me and my career. Guess what? My colleagues on this side of the aisle and me, we are focused on the people of Edmonton Centre. We're focused on Albertans. We're focused on Canadians, making sure they can pay their bills, making sure they have good jobs, making sure that we're fighting climate change, having a national school program. What they're doing is just bluff and bluster and lots of hot air. We're going to be here fighting for Canadians each and every day.
Farmers are suffering, and food has become unaffordable because of the carbon tax. Almost 2 million Canadians are going to the food bank every single month. Yet, on April 1st, the Liberal NDP government increased the carbon tax by 23%. Will this Prime Minister stop punishing Canadians and farmers and pass Bill 234 in its original form?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do think that it's time that the Conservative Party stop trying to mislead Canadians. The price on pollution is an effective mechanism for reducing carbon emissions, and 8 out of 10 Canadian families get more money back. A fact that was underlined by 200 economists across this country that said it is the most efficient and most effective way to reduce emissions that ensures we address affordability. And in fact, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe last week said he explored alternatives to carbon price, but he found they were too expensive. Well, my goodness, we've been saying that for years.
The Honourable Member for Haldimand Norfolk.
Canadians can't afford to live because of the carbon tax. Common sense Conservatives will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. After 8 years of this Liberal NDP government, rent and mortgages have doubled. The Liberal NDP government is just not worth the cost or the corruption. Will this Prime Minister commit to immediately passing Bill 234 in its original form, cancel the carbon tax, and once again make life affordable for Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
This is the fundamental problem with this remade Conservative Party, where policy is based on ideology and ignores all of the facts. 200 economists from across this country underline that the price on pollution enhances affordability for those on modest incomes and addresses climate change in an effective manner. Even Scott Moe and Daniel Smith have said that. And these folks sit on their hands, these climate-denying Conservatives. It is time they listen to people who actually know what they're talking about and abandon their plan to simply let the planet burn.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg au Saint-Jean-Rivière last week, where the housing vacancy rate is 0.4%. Yet a new CMHC report shows that construction will drop drastically over the next year. As a result, CMHC predicts that demand will drive up housing prices, but it doesn't make sense. Does the Prime Minister realize that people will end up in the streets because of his insane policies? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague is right to raise the issue of costs and affordability of housing, particularly in Quebec. And that's why it's so surprising that the Conservatives are against investment that we're making for affordable housing, including social housing in Quebec. First, they perhaps noticed a few weeks ago, we announced that we will be reaching objectives for affordable housing construction. And secondly, they still haven't apologized, to the best of my knowledge, for the accusations, the insults they made with respect to Quebec members of Parliament, including those locally. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, what we saw over the past week are only photo ops, because current programs that are being announced as new have been in place since 2017. And since then, nothing has almost been done with these programs. So once again, photo ops, they don't work. What we're seeing now is that For 8 years now, there's been out-of-control spending. Will the Prime Minister finally listen to the head of the Bank of Canada and stop his uncontrolled spending that do nothing but drive up interest rates? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, if my colleague is looking for photo ops, I would ask him to come with me to visit a project in his riding, the Monte Rosso. We haven't seen him for the past few weeks since project was announced. Ms. Marchand was there a few weeks ago, and they seem to have forget in his own riding. Hundreds of housing units were built, rather than the only mere 6 units that his leader built when they were in power.
Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Mr. Speaker, it's shocking that the average Canadian family must now spend 63.5% of their total pre-tax household income in order to afford a mortgage for the typical home in Canada. Now, it's even way worse in British Columbia, where that's 106%. 100% is someone's entire income. No wonder families are in a financial crisis where they can barely afford to live or feed themselves. And this is after 8 years of this NDP Liberal government. Will the Prime Minister actually build the homes, not bureaucracy and photo ops, in his budget?
The Honourable Minister of Infrastructure and Housing.
Mr. Speaker, I take the question with a heavy dose of irony, considering that we've invested $31.5 million through the Housing Accelerator Fund in that member's constituency. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, this is a fund that not only she, but every Conservative member of Parliament vows to take apart should they form government. Where they will cut funds for housing, we will make the investment. Where we cut taxes, they will put them back on. We are doing what it takes to make it easier to build homes faster, and we're going to put Canadians to work in the process.
Well, member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, Mr. Speaker, a heavy dose of reality is after 8 years of this Liberal NDP government and all of their spending and photo ops, things are worse. And just today, RBC confirmed that Canada's housing crisis is only going to get worse under Liberal policies. They said only 26% of Canadian households can afford a single detached home today. Now, a couple decades ago, that was 49%. The CMHC forecasts in 2025-26 housing starts will even be lower than in 2020-2021. So this Prime Minister is just not worth the cost and the corruption. Will the Prime Minister actually build the homes, not bureaucracy and photo ops, in his budget?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are going to put forward policies that are going to help solve the national housing crisis. We know that higher interest rate environments have made it difficult to build homes. That's why we are cutting taxes on new home construction, which they oppose. It's why we're putting more money on the table to build new apartments, which they oppose. It's why we put money towards incentivizing changes for cities, which they oppose. And just this past week, their deputy leader held a press conference to proudly declare that they were siding with the NIMBYs when it came to municipal zoning reforms. We need to do everything we can to make it easier to build homes more quickly and more cost effectively. It's a shame the Conservatives oppose at every stage.
The honourable member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of deficit spending, people are no longer able to find affordable housing. There's still more bureaucracy than common sense solutions. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. In Saguenay, in just 24 hours, a landlord received over 200 requests for his apartment. And apartments are becoming increasingly rare and expensive. Mr. Speaker, in his next budget, will this Prime Minister finally build housing and stop adding red tape? The Honourable Minister of Public Services. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The next budget is coming up, and we already know there'll be other measures for housing. And my colleague also needs to know that only 2 months ago, we signed with the Quebec government an agreement for $1.8 billion, and this will provide the largest number of new housing units in the history of Quebec. This is an exceptional event that stems from extraordinary collaboration. Unlike the Conservatives who are just squabbling and insulting people, the provinces and the municipalities in particular, we are working for Quebecers with hundreds of thousands of units